this study would not be possible without my co-author, Sally Schedlock. She is straight from Wyoming. She grew up in Sheridan. She is a cowgirl. She does barrel racing. And really the study is inspired by Sally. We have been working together on this topic since 2005. I am a city kid. I grew up in Colorado, but spent a large portion of my life and still continue to in Europe. So I knew nothing about rodeo other than we went on a field trip when I was in elementary school to the Pro Rodeo Hall of Fame. All the cowboys were white. I didn't see any cowgirls. And Sally was my first cowgirl. I even asked her about the big belt buckle and why everyone wears those big belt buckles here. Because I'd never seen people just walk around in them other than Halloween. So I thought that was rather silly. They probably thought, look at the citified idiot walking around campus. She looks rather silly. And Sally wanted to talk about women in rodeo. And I thought, okay, this is an opportunity to learn. One of the things that I do is I love to study ism issues. I love to be a citizen of the world. Any culture I don't know, I dive headfirst in, and rodeo was one of those. And so I said, well, this will be a great idea to work with Sally. And she has firsthand knowledge at that. And she wrote this thesis, and I kept saying, but what about this group? And what about this group? And where are these ethnic minorities? And why do these pictures look like this and they don't look like this? And she said, Dr. Patton, I'm just trying to write a thesis. And I said, fine, let's just get this done, and then let's write a book. And so really, the book and our continuing research is in part inspired by Sally, and I got to get answered some of those questions that I had about where are all the brown people? Where are all the American Indians? Where are the African Americans? Where are all the Latinos? They had to have had a hand in rodeo. And so that is what we do and continue to do. And so I'll talk a little bit about our research, since much of this knowledge was new to me, and maybe it might be to you, or maybe you can show off and say you already knew that. And Sally, if I don't hog all the time, she will talk about some of the current things that have been happening since our first stage of this research. And if I do hog all the time, she can take all the questions.
Fair trade.
Fair trade. Okay. All right. So our goal here was that we looked at over 100 years of rodeo, over 600 images, and we really wanted to figure out the tumultuous relationships between cowgirls and ethnic minorities. And I really didn't know that there was any kind of issue or any tumultuousness to be had, because to me, it's rodeo. To me, it's really brave people or really crazy people getting on the back of a thinking animal, trying to hold on for dear life for the ultimate 8 to 10 seconds, and then you win a large amount of money. And Sally's one of those people who does barrel racing, for example, and other things, who wins, well, smaller purses, but definitely more than what I can. And then we came across this really interesting quote. And so this is really what sparked some of our ideas behind our project. And I'll read this. I saw my first cowgirl in a Sears catalog. I was 3. Up until then, I had only heard of cowboys. I said, Mama, Daddy, that's what I want Santa Claus to bring me. Then they dress you up like a cowgirl, and when you say, I'm going to be a cowgirl when I grow up, they laugh and say, ain't she cute? Then one day, they tell you, look, honey, cowgirls are only for play. You can't really be one. And that's when I holler, wait a minute, hold on. Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny, I understand. They were nice lies, and I don't blame you for them. But now you're screwing around with my personal identity and my plans for the future. What do you mean I can't be a cowgirl? And I thought, yeah, what do you mean we can't be cowgirls? I know I can't be one. And then I started thinking, okay, well, that's one person. That's one cowgirl. And then how many of you watched Little House on the Prairie?
Yeah. Or who are familiar with Laura Ingalls?
Yeah, I got it eventually. That's something that I skipped over since I was living in Germany at the time in the heyday. And part of it, I don't even think I was born. But point being, I never thought about Laura Ingalls Wilder as a cowgirl. And then you get to read the books and her actual statements of working in the ranch, working in the fields, not producing this neo-Victorianism idea of a woman has to be pretty and pristine and not clean, or no, she needs to be clean, not dirty. Well, not dirty in a good way. And so then I thought, wow, who is this Laura Ingalls Wilder person? I thought she was just a TV show. And then we ran into other cowgirls in real life, like Florence Hughes Randolph. Is anyone familiar with her? Florence Hughes Randolph. Big cowgirl. She was interviewed in 1971 and told in an interview this: "I have been carried off for dead several times." Right there, not a career choice for me. She was actually pronounced dead in the arena in 1923, following another rodeo accident several years later, where she was rushed to the hospital, where she awoke to hear the doctor say that if she lived, she would never walk again. Alarmed, she jumped from the bed and fled the building clad in only a sheet.
And she was a bronc rider at the beginning when rodeo started in the late 1800s, early 1900s.
Absolutely.
So they rode rough and tough, and they took some serious falls. So that's probably from one of them.
Yeah, these are one of them. And I mean, these are horrific accidents that would have killed any other competitor or any other person. But it's women like Randolph who really are built from that grit, that toughness, that idea of rodeo that we think of as only assigned to men that end up also being assigned to women. The images of white women competing against steers, broncs, and even men were commonplace in rodeo, but they go out of fashion once we get to the 1920s, particularly 1929, and you'll see an image of that here in a little bit. So it's these women who inspired the book. And so this is just a little bit. Rodeo's history is traditionally white, it's traditionally male. And really, if you go back to the beginnings of rodeo, we're really doing the kind of rodeo that comes out of the Moor tradition. Moor people were those people we now refer to as Africans. Moors were the actual culture. But you really have to go back to ancient Greece. And at the American Heritage Center, they did a big display of pictographs, if you will, of Greece, and you saw these people trying to rope a horse and work with that and think, oh my gosh, these are rodeo images. It gets exported from Greece, goes up into Moors. Moors, Christopher Columbus runs into Moors. If you ever look at the map, they're very, very close. Takes it to Spain. Christopher Columbus then takes it from Spain to Hispaniola, today's Dominican Republic, and then it comes up through South America and up through the Americas. So it really is multiracial and international. We even went all the way, well, I went all the way to Australia and to New Zealand to see how rodeo, and it was a nice excuse for vacation as well, to see how rodeo is crafted there. And so it really is one of these ideas, and the idea behind the book is we want to challenge this mythology of the West, that the West was all white, that it was all male, that rodeo was all white, all male, and something that was only created by us. We are not the inventors of all things unique. And we really want to recenter the contributions of women of all races, as well as ethnic minority men within the sport of rodeo. And so in order to do that, let's just stick right there before I talk about her. We ended up with our 600 images. We had to narrow down, well, the book publishers told us to 20. And then I used my persuasive skills as a rhetorician. And she said, okay, we'll do 40, so we snuck in 42. And, and we really wanted uncommon images, things that you don't see all the time. If you go to Yellowstone and you see those postcards that we always sell to the tourists, we wanted different pictures of women and men in rodeo. And so these are some of the images that we're going to share with you tonight. Some are more common than others, and if you know this area very well, then you're going to recognize some of what we consider even the more rare images. We divided our research category into 6 areas. So this big pile of research, and you have to figure out what you want to do with it. So we ended up seeing 6 categories. And the images you'll see tonight are from these 6 categories. So one we termed Cowgirls and Early Equality. So that means when the women could compete against the men, they had equal participation and rights within the arena. They could do whatever the men were doing. They were not subjected only to barrel racing, for example. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but there's more freedom of choice. Then we moved and we saw this neo-Victorian ideal. So you have to be pretty. You have to put on lip gloss and lipstick, and your hair has to be done just so. So I'll read you some quotes from some of those women who talked about that. Cowgirls as pinups. You'll see some of those. Sexy, sexy. We're getting into some of those cheesecake images. It's not about your skill in the arena anymore. It's about how you look, how pretty you are, how attractive you are to men who are doing the real work of rodeo. Then we get into cowgirls as sex kittens. I tried to pick the most desexualized image. It is a little bit hard, but there's no nudity, but there is suggestion, and I see some younger humans in the room. And then we talk about contemporary issues. What's going on with contemporary issues within rodeo and how women are challenging these stereotypes within the arena. And then finally, we end the book with ethnic minorities in the rodeo arena as well. Okay, so it really becomes important for us to challenge the mythology of the West because people like Jackson Turner, Owen Wister, we know a lot about him in this state, Frank Remington, we get this idea particularly from these three men, and even Theodore Roosevelt, who give us this idea that the West is really rugged and it's supposed to be for men and particularly white men. All of these men came across American Indians, Latinos, and blacks who were part of rodeo, who were active in rodeo. But these men chose to erase the diversity within the West, to sell it to people on the East Coast, to convince them to come out west, to cross the Mississippi, for example. All of these men spent time with it, but the West gets crafted as this idea of it's a white place and a white space. And so that becomes a construction of the West, particularly with the idea of rodeo. Rodeo itself, I took it for granted. I thought it had always been there. It really starts off with festivals, and we're talking about 1847. Festivals are wonderful for building skill. Women and men were already doing this. If you come from a ranching family like Sally has, it really influenced her life in terms of being part of this culture, of this sport. So they already had these skills. So it was an easy transition from being at a ranch to actually competing for money or besting your neighbor, for example. Then the ranching lifestyle really lends itself to be really compatible with rodeo. The first rodeo that's documented, there's some debate about this, but most scholars agree that the first rodeo was July 4th, 1869 in Deer Trail, Colorado. Almost said Deerfield. In Deer Trail, Colorado. Okay, so I'm going to read you something here. But you really have to hear about women coming into the arena. So women come into the arena, and they have these kinds of experiences. Cowboy culture was forced to change. Let's see. Oh, no, is that what I want? Yes. Yes, cowboy culture. So we have cowboy culture, but then there are things that change cowboy culture. We're going to talk about these changes. It's not just gender, but women get blamed for a lot. Big shock. It's 2014. It still happens. Cowboy culture is forced to change due to environmental and industrial changes. There are very few wide open spaces. So even when you have people like Frank Remington saying, come out west, there's these big wide open spaces, not so much by the time it really gets popularized and marketed toward the East Coast. There's fences. There's this idea of land ownership. The mythic cowboy has to ride. And it has to ride and rise from this idea of the creation of the rodeo arena. Because where else are you going to go? Trains are going through big wide open spaces. We have fences up now. It's not the Xanadu that people think it is. Rodeo has remained a strong sport and a national sport within Western identity and within the United States. This also includes cowgirls. Up here we have Prairie Rose Henderson. She's not really doing much, but she needs to be included. She's looking pretty right now. Definitely a skilled competitor within the first 2 decades of the 20th century. She's one of the early cowgirl trendsetters in terms of her flamboyant costumes. Some of these rodeo queens can thank her today. The flamboyant costumes, the buckskin, the feathers, the sequins. So she really had a really interesting way of wearing outfits and whatnot. Well, one of the things, so we have the freedom of Prairie Rose, I also want you to see some of these other women. I'm not going to go through them all. I chose pink because I thought that would be a nice contrast to the black. But you have Oka Curley here. She's doing some bulldogging. And then we have some trick riding on the left. I want you to see this idea of women really being active within the arena. They're not the card holders. They're not helping the men onto the bucking bronc, for example. They're out there. They're doing it. You can't pay me enough money ever in the whole world to do these things. And then things start to happen. Whoa, 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 technology. Technology happens. Women have equality in the arena, and then this accident happens. This is Bonnie McCarroll. This is what changes women's role in rodeo to the present day. It's this one accident. This is not the accident that killed her. She died from a similar accident later in 1929. Because of this death, women were confined then to, you can't be in the arena. There were signs in front of arenas that would say, no dogs, no women, no Mexicans, no Negroes. This starts to close the door of the arena to women. Part of the problem, if you look at where her feet are, women end up getting strapped into the horse. So this horse ends up falling on her.
She was hobbled.
Yeah, she was hobbled.
This is considered riding slick, meaning that your feet were free and you could fall off. In Pendleton in 1929, Bonnie chose on her last ride before she retired, so talk about the social media, and we can talk about social media and how magazines were able to send messages back and forth on the East Coast. So they were able to sensationalize the story significantly. She rode hobbled. Her horse went down. The two people that were supposed to help her get up, they were new. They didn't know how to help her and get her free from the horse. So the horse flips over, and as she goes to get up, the horse actually hits her in the head and basically puts her in a coma. She takes 7 days to die. And there's debate on whether if she died right away, if women would have been in the arena a little bit longer, but there's a lot of other economic things going on at the time that moved women out of the arena. So really she is the pivot point of it. There is firsthand knowledge and stories that I came across at the Cowgirl Hall of Fame that talked about this accident in specific. And so they did say if they had more seasoned hands on hand, she probably would have gotten out. And then riding hobbled. Don't ever tie yourself to a horse. It's not a good idea. Just saying. But it was a horrible tragedy. She was one of the premier rodeo cowgirls. She started at the inception of it, which is about 1897 is when rodeo started to get fans and people started to pay money to come in and see the sport actually, and started to support it to grow into what we see as a multi-billion-dollar business today. And unfortunately, with her death, it was a big change.
Yeah, with her death, it ushers this idea that women need to be protected. Men could say, aha, I told you so. And this is really used as an excuse to get women out of the arena because there were times where they were besting the men. They were outperforming, outcompeting. How else are you going to get women out of the arena? This becomes the perfect example and the first example, I would say, of paparazzi, if you will, because it becomes this death vigil. Mm-hmm. If any of you are familiar with Abraham Lincoln and how he died, and the news media was all over it, and it took a long process. It's the same thing where the media was just hovering over her. She was the sensation in all of the papers, and they're just waiting for this woman to die. And as soon as she finally dies, then figuratively and literally the arena doors close on women. And it changes their role in rodeo for really until it's cowgirls like Sally, and we'll talk about that in quite a bit of time, but women's roles end up changing. And you get into these kinds of roles where suddenly instead of being active and an equal participant within a sport that they help create, because you can think about and go all the way back to Buffalo Bill and all of the various shows and how that went to international, you get these cheesecake images of, I have to look pretty, she has lipstick on, she's posing, she's no longer active. I'm sure she even smells good because she doesn't even look like she sweats. She is there to be admired and looked at, but not used for her skill. And then, so that would be an example of we're moving into this Victorian ideal and also into this ideal of even a pinup. So we get the pinup on the right-hand side, we get the sex kittens. There is no way on this earth that I would have thought she was an active cowgirl. And tell us who she is.
Who is?
I set you up. It's Kimberly Harmon.
I would have to look it up.
Look up
Sorry.
in her book. That's okay.
I know that she. Okay, so
She's
David
award-winning.
Stocklin hasn't anybody familiar with his work?
He's one of the
there's a
premier
lot.
photographers of cowgirls and cowboys.
There's like he does a lot of the cowboy pictures, images for cowgirls, date books, planners, calendars. Basically, King's. If you go to King's, you'll see a lot of his work there. So he took a lot of big name girls, or women, sorry, I should say women, and put them in really odd poses like this. And so I remember Kimberly Herman being a top, I'm not sure if she's in cutting or reining, but she is a huge contributor to the cowgirl and rodeo world, and puts her in this pose. And I still have yet to figure out exactly what's going on. And so all of his pictures of cowgirls seem to be extremely sexualized, but if you look at the cowboys, and he does, a book on them, they're all active, roping, chasing cows, and yet we're stuck against a tree. I figured that out.
Yeah.
Or in a
Please.
bathtub.
So in the same way that women were strapped into corsets, for example, we see these women of then and now being confined into other areas. I wanted to read you a little quote about a corset before we moved on. Because you can think about the corset as the moving metaphor for where women are within sports, the unequal pay or the unequal pay, the way women are sponsored versus the way men are sponsored. It's far easier to become $1 million cowboy than it is to become a cowgirl. Same thing with basketball. We don't have any NFL, I would say credible NFL women's teams, not the ones where they're in the cute little bikinis and those kinds of things. Let me read you this quote from one of the cowgirls who ends up working in the Hollywood arena because she has no place else to work. Wearing the gender-appropriate accoutrement, cowgirls bronked, rode, and roped wearing corsets and dresses. So if you go back to the first image, which way am I going? Crazy. Where there's creativity, suddenly, and women were wearing pants, suddenly you have to be in a dress again. Corsets and dresses, white higher-class women were held to the expectations of being a lady, but the rules and expectations for lower-class women were sometimes relaxed. This was due to the necessity of women helping the men on small family ranches. Strong cowgirls, however, like Vera McGinnis, we don't have a picture of her today, tried to perform in the appropriate Victorian long dress with a long corset. After her first rodeo competition, Vera stated, "I was the most exhausted girl in the whole world when the struggle was over. My lungs ached, my knees buckled under me, and I wished wholeheartedly that my long corset was in Hades. The next day, she junked her corset for life." And so for her, that was that epitome of burning the bra, of saying, I'm not going to do this anymore. Over Halloween, I thought, well, I'll be one costume or another. One of the costumes I tried on was a dress with a corset, a family wedding dress from 1844. I couldn't breathe. So I can't imagine, whoops, am I going the right way? No, I'm going the wrong way. So I can't imagine being on a horse and having to then rope and ride, and your feet are hobbled in, and you're still trying to do everything that needs to be done. This is very temperamental, because I'm not going to blame me at all. So we have another example. These are two drastically different images from Stocklin. The one on the left is still cowgirl resting herself, supposedly sitting naked in a tub or horse trough, something like that. And then on the right-hand side, you see a woman in action. The images that you really see with women in action today are because they have been deemed not attractive enough to have close-up face shots of them. If you see a close face shot of someone, that means they're very pretty. They're going to sell a postcard. They're going to sell an image. They're really not going to do a heck of a lot. She is on the left. Liz Batcha is our stereotypical image of a cowgirl hat, long blonde hair. It's a very sexy, nice picture. On the right, we don't see Joy Hawkins' face. It's one of the things that this photographer does, unfortunately well. Men are always seen active. It doesn't matter if they're ugly or attractive. They're going to be seen active because that's what men do. They do stuff. But women, if they're attractive, are supposed to sit down, rest themselves. You look tired. Versus if you're supposedly not attractive, you're going to be seen more in active roles. And so we critique this idea of activity with women. If we move on to the idea of diversity, I wanted to give you just a couple of pictures in thinking about that trajectory from Greece to the African continent to Spain, down through Hispaniola and up through the Americas. That's where we have a lot of these ethnic minority bodies coming into. And we have to think about, and I did not think about this until our research, cattle drives were 25 to 30% ethnic minority. That's quite a number whenever we see images and we think, oh, wow, it's really an all-white male affair, and it really is not. I want to read you a quote by Jim Perry. It's one of the most famous quotes. Jim Perry was an African-American cowboy, roper, and cook. And he used to work at the XIT Ranch in Texas in the late 1800s, and he worked there for over 20 years. And passionate about rodeo, and he said, quote, "If it weren't for my damned old black face, I'd have been a boss of one of these divisions long ago." And what he's alluding to is this idea of race and place. So we start to have categories, not just of women in the sport, but where men can be in the sport, particularly ethnic minority men. Even the term cowboy is a racist term. Cowboy was only referred to African Americans, American Indians, and Latino men. Boy, lower. White men were referred to as cowhand until they started to see the skill in which these ethnic minorities were able to work with the animals. And so then everyone wanted to be called a cowboy. At first it was definitely a hierarchical term. Boy, you're not white. Hand, you are white. And it's very interesting because on the left we have Bill Pickett, and he is the one who can be credited with bulldogging. And so in this picture, which startled everyone, I'll read you if you can't read the pink. This is in Texas. He startled the spectators when in 1904 he threw a steer using his teeth only. The stunt evolved into a bulldogging contest. I want to kiss a bull. We don't need any interspecies contact. I'm good with it. So I have bulldogging, but we often forget the man who created bulldogging. So he teaches white men how to do this sport, but then he's kicked out of the arena. The only time he can actually rodeo after the arena closes is he has to leave the United States, so he goes down to Mexico, or sometimes before he became really famous, he would dress up as a toreador before the sign said, no dogs, no Negroes, no Mexicans, and he'd try to pass himself off as Latino in order to ride. And then on the right-hand side for you all, we have Jesse Stahl, and he's riding Glass Eye. And we love this picture because it's the epitome of freedom. I think that's the joy that everyone experiences for that 8 to 10 seconds within the arena where race, place, and space may not matter. It's your relationship with the animal. And then when you're off of the animal, that's when it all comes crashing down. So ethnic minorities had to find their own spaces, and that's why today we still have, even though everything is integrated, we still have separate ethnic minority, what am I looking for? Ethnic minority shows, rodeos.
You're talking about circuits?
Yeah, the ethnic minority circuits,
Okay.
for example. Like the Bill Pickett circuit, the American Indian circuit, the Latino circuit, because of the idea where you can get a fair ride. I threw these pictures in because we stumbled upon one of the most controversial issues within rodeo today, and that's still talked about today. And I want to read you a little bit about this. So we have all three people who are involved on this. So Jackson Sundown, you see Jackson Sundown on the left-hand side. He was meant to be a Pendleton champion. In 1916, he became a world championship bronc rider. He was over 50 years old. Previous to this accomplishment, two significant stories emerged from his career. In 1911, in Pendleton, Jackson Sundown competed for the championship against George Fletcher, he's on the right-hand side, an African-American cowboy, and John Spain, he's at the bottom of the screen there, a white cowboy and a member of the local ranching community. At the end of the competition, Spain was unfairly judged the winner of the bronc riding, and Fletcher came in second. The crowd was vocally disappointed. However, the newspaper account tried to justify the choices, saying that Fletcher made a showier ride, but ultimately Spain had the harder horse to cover. To this day, rodeo historians debate and fans still discuss the question of, was a black cowboy or Indian cowboy going to be judged superior to a white cowboy? Times were different in 1911. That's still a hotly debated contest.
And they actually have it videoed. So you can actually see the original ride from what we're discussing here. It was, we found it at the University of Wyoming in one of the really archaic rooms. And there was some like dust on it, so we dusted it off and watched it. And truthfully, Jackson Sundown should have won. The John Spain's horse like came out and boop, 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 done. And you're like, that was it, really? So maybe he would have got a reride had he rode today. But basically back then, based on how they did, they would ride till the end, till the horse was done bucking, and then you'd get off and they would judge. So Jackson should have won that one for sure. And George Fletcher had a good ride too, but Jackson did a much better job.
And so these contestants, these rodeo cowboys and cowgirls, but really the guys, are dealing with the laws. Laws come into question, like Jim Crow laws, for example. Separate but equal, that stays in place till 1964 with the Civil Rights Act, 1965. Really, if you go up to 1965 with the right for African Americans to vote, black people could not vote until 1965 in this country. So you have these things that are pushing ethnic minorities out of the arena. American Indians, they went internationally. We have a picture in our book of them meeting the King of Spain, and their glorious headdress and all these other things. But really their participation gets reduced to parades. The top one is from Sheridan. And then this bottom one, you see some women meeting, I can't remember who it is, but you become sort of the exotic other. The Indian shows, Indian dances become like the prequel to the actual event, or the halftime entertainment before the actual rodeo, and then we have the real stuff is to begin. Since we're just a little short on time here, I'm just going to mention just a couple of other things. We have I wanted to show his picture. He's a famous Latino cowboy, Kenny Mclean. He's on a bucking horse in Pendleton in 1961. And we already talked about the Spanish and Latino contributions to rodeo, and we can talk more about that. Many times these ethnic minorities were told they had to ride either before or after whites were to ride, and this was practiced all the way through the 1960s because it was believed that the spectators did not want to see ethnic minorities participate in the sport. And Abe Morris, he's one of the cowboys that's very famous from the University of Wyoming. He talks about this as well in his book, as do other people. Like, I've just spaced his name.
Fred Whitfield?
No, James Pickens.
Okay.
He's Richard Weber on Grey's Anatomy. Thank you all for coming out on Friday or Thursday, since it's Thursday what to watch. But yeah, he's a cowboy as well when he's not acting on Grey's Anatomy. Mm-hmm. The middle picture, this is one of the rare gems we actually found. This woman is an African American. We did not find any pictures other than that of African American women, particularly in the early times, who participated in rodeo. They were always a sponsor girl or queen. American Indian women tend to really be the queens. And then we just put a little conglomeration of photos together. Many times when white women wanted to be in the arena, but they were looking for an American Indian woman, white women would pass themselves off as American Indians. So then they get double paid, while the American Indian woman saying, wait, I'm still over here. I want to ride, and they don't get a chance. And here are a couple other images. This is a Stockland image. We see her in action. We don't see her face. Jamie Goddard, and then Fred Whitfield. The language is problematic, particularly in the black community, comparing an African American to an animal. Does not go well, even if you are on the bull, the horse, whatever. And then we just wanted to say with Fox Hastings, thank you for listening.